Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Welcome to BPM 205 Migration and Integration in 6 Months. I'm Sherry from Laserfiche International, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker today, Dr. Farid Amin, Technical Solutions Architect at mortgage servicing firm Acenden Limited. Dr. Farid was able to migrate 28 million documents and integrate Laserfiche with various business process applications in 6 months with Laserfiche's out-of-the-box workflow features. Please welcome Dr. Farid Amin.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon to you all, and thank you for attending. First and foremost, I would like to thank Laserfiche International and the organization committee for granting me the privilege to come and speak here today at Empower 2014. It's an honor. And also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our VAR Global ECM Solutions, who have given us tremendous support in ensuring that this project was successful, and also for nominating us for the Run Smarter Award, which we were extremely delighted to accept yesterday and after winning it. So what I would like to share with you today is our experience and our solution, which we designed and developed in-house using as many of the Laserfiche suite of applications, with an emphasis that we minimize on any form of external development where possible. The solution then was implemented, and it helped us to migrate some 28 million plus documents from a variety of sources, including an existing document management system, IDM, which is supplied by Tower and is now supported by OpenText, and also the integration with a couple of our servicing platforms, one being the Mortgage Savings Suite, supplied by Sopra Banking Group, and one being Teleman, supplied by Experian Decision Analytics. Furthermore, we have an off-site printing facility at Rico, and we integrated with them also, as well as the traditional scanning of post, incoming documents, and emails, and desktop user scans. So, who is Acenden? Who are we? Acenden is a mortgage servicing company based in the United Kingdom. We service loans on behalf of third-party clients. We are quite a large company in the United Kingdom in this business. We service currently 65,000 mortgages, which are worth approximately £5.5 billion or $8.8 billion. We have 350 staff in 3 different offices, one in central London. The call center is in a town called High Wycombe, about 25 miles northwest of London. And we also have an office in Ireland, Dublin. Acenden prides itself in using its data from its core platforms, analyzing it, modeling it, and that data analytics, we try to enhance and improve our business processes and move it back into our core platform so that we can provide a value-added service to our customers and clients. So, documents. Why are documents in particular important to us? As a mortgage servicer, any correspondence that we receive from a customer or we send out to a customer, we got to keep a complete audit trail for the complete life cycle of the mortgage and beyond. These documents not only have to be easily accessible, they have to be readily available. The documents also instigate certain business processes. For example, a customer may send in a letter requesting a statement. When that document is indexed, we have to inform our servicing platform so that the relevant departments can action that work and send the statement out. That metadata of the document coming in and the document being sent out provides us the statistics to see if we have met our service level agreements. Likewise, we have configurable servicing platforms which, when a business process is executed, a document is sent out automatically, and after a certain period of time, another document would be sent out. If at a later date we are audited, we have to provide the metadata and the evidence that we followed the regulations that we, as a mortgage servicer, have to follow. Currently, we do approximately 1.3 million correspondences per year, incoming and outgoing. So we, I think, run a relatively large document management system. I mentioned we had a document management system prior to Laserfiche, which was IDM. We refer it to as Tower. Why did we decide to change? It was the sole Unix system with the Oracle database backend in our company, whereas everything else was Microsoft-based. We had a single point of excellence. We only had one person who knew the system very well, so we were pretty well exposed. Furthermore, in 2003, when this solution was first implemented, the business requirements were such that the archiving of data was not required to be readily available. So if a document was a couple of years old, we would archive it off, thinking we would not need to access it that often. So the storage solution was actually on optical disks in a jukebox. The disadvantage of that was that operationally, if an agent on the phone was talking to a customer and had to retrieve a document, if it was not a recent one, the jukebox would be sent a request to go and find a DVD in its trays and put it into one of its 10 drives and read it and provide the document back onto the user's screen. Of course, as the business processes changed and we needed to access more and more historical documents, there was more. As documents were required, more and more historical documents had to be viewed by the agents. What we realized was we were getting several IT incidents where the systems were getting extremely slow and at times unusable, because at the end of the day, the jukebox had 10 drives. If more than 10 users were at the same time trying to get historical documents, there was a delay, a queue, and by and large, typically you would get a timeout. So we obviously had to do something about this. Furthermore, although we did have a document management system, we also had some legacy platforms which we inherited, and their documents actually didn't exist in IDM. So if an agent required to retrieve all the documents for a mortgage, and the mortgage was quite an old one, they not only had to use the document management system, they also had to go to the legacy systems and retrieve the documents from there also, which made that a very time-consuming affair. Lastly, the upgrade path. So we went back to OpenText and said we would like to do an upgrade here because this is now not fit for purpose. What they said was fine, but you will have to migrate to our platform, which we currently run. And we said, fine, come and show us what you can do. The management did also decide if we do have to migrate, well, why not look out on the market to see who else can help us? So there were a few, and I was not involved in that selection process, but I believe there were a few, including Laserfiche, who were called in to do a demo. At the end, of course, we chose Laserfiche. These are the reasons why. It fitted most of our criteria. It was a Microsoft-based infrastructure system, which meant that our single point of excellence was avoided. Also, it was just not a document management system repository. It had a whole suite of applications which our management team could see could be utilized more than just DMS. Also, I guess the take is, if you have 32,000 customers, even if they're in one continent, it can't be such a bad system. So that, believe it or not, was one of the factors. Global ECM did a magnificent presentation. They even showed us a site, London Borough of Tower Hamlets, to go and visit, to see it in action. And they were very impressed with them also. As when I came on board, the one thing that struck me about Laserfiche, it was very Windows Explorer-like. It was therefore quite modern, quite user-friendly, and if most people are computer literate these days to at least open Windows Explorer, to them, the culture shock of moving from one system to another would be less. So we ended up getting Laserfiche Rio, and I've quoted on here the versions that we are currently running and the different applications that we are using. Okay, so the project has started, the check has been signed. This is where the work starts. What did you have to do? Not a great deal, just migrate about 25 million documents. When we actually started, we found out they ended up being 28. Not from one system, but from 5. And while we're doing that, production BAU carries on as normal. We had to integrate with MSS, integrate with Teleman, and integrate it in a way that the user does not get a degradation of service. We also had to connect with Planet Press, which is the Ricoh side of things, as well as typically Microsoft Exchange for emails, internal emails as well as external emails. The additional functionality is the traditional, you've got to get your scanners working, the post coming in, and so on and so forth. In addition, because we are a mortgage servicing company for third-party clients, we get deals whereby we have to onboard loans. They would send us a whole wad of documents, typically hard copies, sometimes in electronic form, and we had to have a functionality to onboard that very quickly. Likewise, and it hasn't happened yet, a customer might say, I don't want you to service my loans anymore. Can I have them back? So we got to have the facility to safely give them their documents and also ensure that they are destroyed. So the 6 months starts from here. First things first, we spent a long time trying to design the repository. It wasn't painful, but it was quite challenging. Nevertheless, we ended up with a repository design. Firstly, this is the infrastructure topography. All our servers were virtual. As a DBA in my previous life, when I found out it was going to be a SQL server in a virtual environment, I shrieked. But believe it or not, it does actually work, and it works very, very well. It all depends how you configure it. So the advantage of having a virtual environment is at any time we want to ramp it up, we can do so. That was our repository design. So 2 weeks work, and we got 3 folders. But it was very important because what is it, as one of the guys from Babson, I believe, said in one of his quotes, the design element is the most important because if you have to go back to amend it, you have a serious problem. So these folders had a distinct sort of feature. So the workspace was whenever a document came from the outside world into Laserfiche, it goes into workspace. Workflow is looking at this folder all the time, depending where, I will show you the subfolders in a minute, depending where the documents reside, different workflows are executed. The users were not allowed in workflow. If they wanted to import a document, whether it be by email or by just simply drag and drop, they could only do it to My Imports. I used the My Imports from the My Documents idea. So the advantage also of My Imports was we could set up the security that if I imported a document and I didn't succeed in indexing it properly, it will remain there and I can see it. But if someone else has their documents, I can't see theirs. But as an administrator, I could see everything. Finally, the resting place of all documents. We used a worm storage solution, a write once, read many, for all the documents that enter the operations folder. And that is where the final destination of all documents, which are always attached to an account number, reside. On this slide, I've just gone through a breakdown, and just to show you, in operations, as you can see, I've made up some mortgage numbers here. The advantage of this design was, although users don't use this, they use search. However, as a support point of view, if somebody says we got some missing documents for this mortgage, they'll always say for this mortgage. We, as the support side, just need to go into one of these folders and say, well, how many documents do you see? I see this many. Well, you're doing your research wrong. And therefore, it became very easily supportable. On the second one, this is what quick fields populated. So I'll talk about this a bit later. But when the scanning gets done, QuickFields sends the documents to Laserfiche. They wanted a way of noting which ones we need to do with a higher priority. So we designed this folder structure for them, depending on the barcodes in QuickFields. The third one is anything that comes from the external systems. And every single system has its own ready-to-index folder, which Workflow is constantly monitoring. And anything that fails goes into the index failed for the appropriate system. And therefore, if something is wrong, or if you want to monitor that something has failed, it's very easy to see which document from which system has not indexed properly. The last one was migration. I'll talk about that very soon, about the folder structure. And it kind of follows the same structure as those, but I will go in more detail in a moment. This was one of the cool things about Laserfiche, the templates being color-coded. Now, it may not seem a big deal, but I actually thought this was a big deal. If I was a user and I searched for a mortgage, I could quite easily just see the traditional Word and your Acrobat for PDF icons. How do I know that this is not quite indexed properly? So we color-coded our templates to show the user that obviously if it's red and you are about to print this document, stop, it's wrong. If it's green, if it's blue, go ahead. And likewise, we gave other color codings, and we used that in the client interface. I believe it has been useful, and we had good user feedback for that. These are a few of the template designs. So on the left-hand side here, this is what's presented to the user. The indexer gets presented this, the ordinary user, so to speak, gets presented this. We try to keep everything in the same order across the templates. These three, incidentally, are the three key fields. Without populating these, there is absolutely no way that Workflow is going to accept their indexed data. On the right-hand side, this is the template used by the systems. So we talked about Teleman, we talked about MSS, we talked about Rico. When we integrated those, they were all auto-indexed using the system template. The difference here was, if that document was system generated, you can't change it. You can't reindex it because the system has generated it. If it was scanned or imported, of course, you can reindex it, people can make a mistake and so on and so forth. So for them, we had these two templates. Notice the color coding, green and red. If they successfully index, it'll tell them you've done it correctly, well done, and what you actually did. This area here is if they want to reindex it for any particular reason. If they got it wrong, it'll tell them why they got it wrong, allow them to correct it, and down here tell them what they actually did. So this is the metadata we introduced to assist the users. That's our security model. 7 different user groups. All our security was Windows authenticated. We were using AD groups. There's the 3 folders. Every user had their own function. So accordingly, we believe in a philosophy which most IT systems and administrators do is, if you don't need to use it, you ain't going to get the rights. And we kind of followed that into the Laserfiche world as well. Over here, obviously, is the templates. Various users could only access certain templates, and that's the security model kind of in a nutshell. Right, migration strategy. So when we looked at this for the first time, and I thought, okay, we got to migrate this vast amount of documents, but we got to migrate it in a manageable way so that we know where we are, we know how far we've got, and also if something went wrong, we knew exactly where it went wrong. So what we decided to do was create a migration data table for every system that we were going to migrate from. We know that the document always has a unique name. In every system, it has a unique name. Likewise, in our legacy systems, every document had a unique name. We populated that into a migration table. For each document, we also extracted the metadata. For one of the systems, we had no metadata. We had to work with the business to actually generate it for Laserfiche purposes. We then also generated a Laserfiche name, what we were going to call it inside Laserfiche. We then decided to chunk the documents into batches of 100,000. The 100,000 wasn't a random number. We actually played around with folders within Windows and Laserfiche, and we found 100,000. So when you clicked a subfolder, 100,000 documents, it didn't take forever for you to sort of see the full list of documents. We placed that all into a table, and we ran a little. Now, when I said we used all Laserfiche, this is one of the places where we didn't use Laserfiche to do this. Remember, these documents were stored in production environment. So on production folders, in production systems. For IDM, they had to be pulled out separately anyway. And what we did is we got the documents and placed them into special area, specially created for us, into subfolders of 100,000 documents each. This is the migration table, and all the systems there were more fields than this, but these are the most important fields that I wanted to show. The X file name is what that system, its unique identifier for a document was. LF file name is what we were going to call it in Laserfiche. The account number and document identifier were compulsory. You had to provide those. And then there's the other fields, which you typically see in most systems. The important thing here is that naming convention, which Harvey will smile about, took us approximately 2 days to come up with that. But it was very important because, again, once you've done this, if I had to go back and rename it all right, it can be done, but we had to make it in a way that the user can accept it. So that here is the mortgage number in the entry name itself. That initial X, together with that X, was which system did it come from? For the OpenText system we were migrating, it was V for Vignette. For our Summit legacy, it was S. For Mortgage Manager, which is another system we had, it was M. Going forward, it has L in there. You know what that stands for. This on the end was the unique identifier number for each document. So that naming convention was used, and a migration data table was made. Since we had this migration data table, this was now our master. If this verified field and success field on the end, which were yeses and nos, or zeros and ones, at the end of the day were fulfilled, we knew we had migrated all our documents. So, the import process. I mentioned the folder structures. Ready to migrate A001, 2, and 3. Each of those folders had 100,000 documents in them. If the migration failed for any reason, it would go into the migration failed. We had this structure in Windows on our file system, and we had that structure in Laserfiche also. You could marry the two up at any time to see A001 on my file system says I got 100,000 100,000 documents. On Laserfiche side, it's also going to be 100,000 documents. That's the first check. Right, we're done. This is not moving. Okay. So what we had to do was, from our production filers, move them to our separate area, which we could then utilize. We used, now I don't know if any guys here are familiar with SQL Server, but there is SSIS, which is SQL Server Integration Services. We created a package which simply, using that master data table, because we put the source directory in there as well, we went and got the document and populated into the folders of 100,000 on the file system. Then on the next stage was we used import agent to monitor those folders and then push them into the workspace area under that subfolder in Laserfiche. So that's import agent doing its bit. The next part was, once it's inside Laserfiche, workflow will then apply the template and apply the metadata from querying that master database. Like so. So we had a workflow for that. We had a rule to check the folder, validate the document. So if we've got a document in the folder which actually didn't exist in that migration data table, we were not to migrate it. If it did, we'll get its metadata, apply the metadata to the template, and then tell the migration data table that we have got the document and we're happy with it. Then route it to the operation, or if it fails, obviously move it to the migration failed area. Reconciliation. So we may have migrated our documents, say the first 100,000. As I said, the key is reconciliation. So one reconciliation is in the Laserfiche database, obviously the document goes in there. We reconcile that against our master data migration. We reconciled whether the metadata was copied over correctly and attached correctly. We reconciled that no files, obviously, every file has a size. So we also reconciled that is the size of the document identical to the size of the document in Laserfiche. When we worked with IDM, it was slightly different. Because it was Unix-based, we couldn't really use that formula. We had to do a ballpark within plus or minus 10%. But for the Windows ones, that's the criteria we used. So reconciliation was actually a big thing. Although you can set this up, you can set up your workflow, you can set up your folders, your import agent. It may come in fine, but doesn't mean it's come in properly. And there were cases when it looked like the document had come into the repository, but it was zero-sized. It was mainly because we ran out of disk space. And for that reason, we had to re-import it again. Using the same master data table, we were able to do that and recognize what has succeeded and what hasn't. The extra things that we had to do for the IDM system was we had multi-titles and we had annotations. Multi-titles being you have one document but it has multi-purposes. You need to create duplicate documents for them. Annotations, I think in Laserfiche terms, is sticky notes. We created a simple workflow to do those elements. And lastly, emails. Emails out of IDM was a complete nightmare. The reason being, if an email had an attachment against it of different types, it would convert into binary that Laserfiche could not see. So we had to use their own provided toolset to extract the document or documents. So one email, multiple attachments, say 3, that's 4 documents. That's why the 25 million became 28. That is our workflow. I won't go through it all, but that's where we actually check, is that document required? Is it in the master data table? Yes, get its metadata for us. This is where it's renaming the entry to that LF file name I was referring to, assign the template, migrate the entry, tell the master data table I've got everything. If it wasn't to be migrated, we also updated the table. And this is the annotations part, just to move it aside so that we need to do some annotations later. As I mentioned, that table, there were much more fields that we used, but I only showed you the main ones. And then this is the catch part of the workflow. This workflow was used for all our migration systems. Right, the bit that I think should be of most interest to people, which is what problems did we have? So we started importing, and we were very happy until we realized it's going to take us about a year and a half, because one import agent did about 4,000 per hour. Went to speak to our boss and said, can we have some more import agents? Yes, we bought 3. And we had 3 import agents running in parallel. Next problem, workflow gave up on us. It wouldn't query the metadata quick enough. Fine, we heavily indexed, and I mean proper indexed the table, and improved that one a lot more so that the querying was very fast. Once that was resolved, workflow still couldn't keep up, and what we found is that import agent was throwing in the documents and workflow was just piling behind with several thousand workflows just sitting there waiting. what we spoke to Laserfiche about this, and they said, well, in the workflow admin console, you can throttle up the threads per core. We did that, and we had 8 cores, 8 threads, 64 workflows running on one server. Just for good measure, we added another workflow server, another 64 threads. So we had 128 workflows able to process 128 documents as soon as they appeared. That was when workflow started to catch up with import agent. Of course, the problems don't stop there, and this is a suggestion that if anyone is migrating, you should seriously think about. We found that migrate entry took a very long time. We don't know why, and to be honest, we never asked Laserfiche why. All we did was remove it and did the migrate entry, which is going from the workspace volume to the operations volume, sort of in chunks later on in a separate workflow. Of course, there was one database server, and it was being quite heavily hammered, and the performance was getting worse and worse and worse. In fact, it did fall over a few times also. We got to the DBAs, they rebuilt the indexes, and they actually found that the file size growth was happening too frequently, so they mapped it out, and we set it to 10 gig. Incidentally, our database currently is 180 gig. So we chunked it up in 10 gig chunks, so that when we ran out of data file space, yes, it would take a long time to set up 10 gig, but at least for a while, it was happy with importing without any performance degradation. The last thing is more to do with IDM. The extraction process did continually fail, and I think one of the major reasons here was it was a system that was in production. We couldn't just ramp up using all 10 disks, etc. So what we started doing was making smaller batches, so that if it did fall over, at least we had some measure and could use some of the documents, because otherwise we were doing 150,000 documents in one batch, and it might fall over about a quarter of the way through, and we weren't sure exactly where we were in that extraction. That's all I have to say about migration, and all I can say, it was extremely painful. But sadly, we enjoyed it. And we had a couple of guys who worked tremendously on this day and night for months on end. There was no such thing as a weekend, and there was no such thing as midnight and 6 a.m. So I'd like to acknowledge them for that. That included me as well. Integration strategy. The integration strategy actually was actually, I think, more difficult to do, but less challenging than migration. By the way, this integration strategy and the development of this was done while we had one eye on the migration. So we became cross-eyed at the end of this one. I'd put this diagram up. This is Acenden's systems and how they all link up. And all I want to show is that these 4 is what we were dealing with. And as you can see, 3 of them, the 3 big boxes, were pretty core. The 4th, obviously, there's some more there as well. So just to give you an idea of what we were working with, how important it was, how much it was valuable to the company and the operations. So what I'm going to go through now is the integration, because I'm conscious of time, integration and indexing solution one by one. So scanning and indexing. In comes your post. Your post room sorts out your emails. We created them barcodes, which they used as document separators. We had quick fields profiles set up for them. They would scan them in using quick fields, send them through to Laserfiche, and into the workspace, of course. And the next stage would be just there, just showing you where it goes to. When the document was sent from external sources, we as a business decided that we weren't going to just jump in and put everything in. So we rejected OCR and all that. We said, let's do a like for like first. Then as we get more comfortable and more confident and we can prioritize our work, we will then move on to the OCR side. So any document that came from outside was indexed by hand. So we had some indexers that would open the document, assign the template, Those three fields, mortgage number, business area, document identifier, were populated. And then when they committed, workflow would be instigated, and just like a bit of the migration, it would actually go and see this account number you put in, is it valid? Is the business area that you put in, is it acceptable to this account number? And the document identifier you put in, does it belong to that function and business? We did use dynamic fields for the business area and document identifier, but for the account number, we couldn't use that. So when the index is working with a document, they happily go on to the next one. They will see the icon changing from gold to green or gold to red. So this is where actually the coloring actually assisted them. And then at the very end, what they used to do, when they got a whole pile of indexing done, we created a business process workflow which would commit all the green ones, all the ones that succeeded, and leave the red ones behind for them to sort out. That was what the scanning indexing solution was. There was a couple of workflows behind it, but again, I wouldn't say it was highly complex, but nevertheless, this was one element that we had to get right. The reason being is because when post comes in, it is absolute of paramount importance that is dealt with as soon as possible. You can't have post lying around for a couple of days. So we had to make sure this was slick. Special note to this bit here. When the document goes into the operations folder, we from our lookup database, which we created separately, had to realize that this document type, does it need to go to any of our servicing systems? If it did, we stored a record into a separate interface table, had a separate scheduled workflow which would pick these up and send them off to Teleman or to MSS or to both, and they would handle the interface records themselves. They had that functionality already. Email and desktop. For emails, we were monitoring so there's two types of emails. These are the external emails. We are monitoring one mailbox, which we used MagnaMail as a solution. So as soon as an email is imported, MagnaMail would pick it up, attach the template, and send it into Laserfiche, into the workspace area again. And we have a criteria which all our third parties are aware that they put their document type, colon, and the mortgage number. And then we use workflow and, when you split up the file name, regular expressions. In the workflow to split up the file name and then attach that metadata, once again using the very same queries I mentioned earlier, to see, is this mortgage number correct? Is it valid? Is the business area valid? Is the document ID valid? And then send it to auto-index it into operations. That's where it went. The other sort was when a user used to drag and drop into my imports, or from Microsoft Word, Excel, Outlook, using the icons there, saved to Laserfiche. They were presented with a template. They used to populate it themselves. When it gets populated, it goes into the My Imports folder. Laserfiche workflow would pick that up, validate again that the metadata is correct, and then put into the operations folder. Lastly, this is the workflow element I'm referring to. So as soon as it enters the Laserfiche repository, the workflow would query the file name and the metadata, the information given to it, assign the template and attach the metadata if it is correct, route it to operations, and once again, insert an interface record if that document type required to go to MSS or Teleman. Rico solution was similar but slightly different. Rico, we used to send them a comma-separated file which they generate documents. And every night they provide us a bundle of documents through secure FTP onto our servers, which import agent we set up to monitor. For every document, there was an associated IDX file, which was simply a text file with 2 bits of metadata, mortgage number and document identifier. What we did, when import agent brought them both into the workspace area, into the Laserfiche repository, i.e. there, we then delved into the world of SDK, wrote a script to read that text file, extract the metadata, split out the information we needed using regular expressions, and then the same scenario, query the database, is the account number valid, is the document ID valid? Yes, it is, root it, if not, fail it. So that's the auto-indexing. And just, I forgot to mention in the previous one, for each one, any failure would go into here. Once again, repeat. If the interface is, if that document is required to go to Teleman or MSS, it would create an interface record. So as you can probably see, by and large, the bottom concept is identical. It's kind of the same thing is happening every single time. And it's just the how's it coming in that's important. How it's going into Laserfiche and thereafter is actually identical. Now to the heavy solutions. The Teleman integration. Teleman, there were two types of documents generated. Now these are documents generated by Teleman themselves. You could have a strategy, a batch process that runs overnight which says, okay, you have set up an arrangement or you're due a letter today, and the batch process would automatically generate the letter, the document. A batch process after that would extract that document after it's been published and put it into a folder. What we did was pick up on that folder, which is here, and use import agent to put into Laserfiche. Because this is automated document, a system generated, no one has actually printed this document. So we got import agent that once it's successful, move it to Planet Press, which is the folder which Rico pulled away and took the document and printed it and posted it out. If it was a user, they do print the document. The same process happens, but although this says, they both say TM docs, this one is automatic documents and this is manual documents. Import agent would put them into Laserfiche repository, but not send it to Planet Press because it's already been printed here. And that's where it appeared in the Laserfiche repository. I think you've seen that before. Again, it's the same as the previous ones I discussed. Last but not least, the MSS integration solution. They always get printed manually. And the concept is identical. It's just the difference is there is no Teleman. In Teleman, there was a batch process that generated the documents. In MSS, everything happened in real time. It appeared there. Once again, very, very similar to the previous one. These are box diagrams. There are slight differences in the actual workflow, but conceptually it's the same thing. Okay, what problems did we get in the integration? What we found was, unfortunately, when we went live a week later, we had a rate change set of documents of 60,000 appearing, which happens every quarter. That caught us red-handed and surprised us a bit, because what we found was when the documents came through at night, workflow had about several thousand waiting in the morning. So when the users started indexing, they got no response, and they thought it had all broken. So what we had to do was cancel the Rico side and allow them to use the whatever they wanted to index. We then spoke to Laserfiche and to Global and found out the import agent can be scheduled. So all our Rico documents are now scheduled to run only at night. And at 5 a.m. we stop. The reason we stop at 5 a.m. is despite even stopping at 5 a.m., there's always a backlog, and we had to ensure that that was finished by 8 a.m. when our business started. However, afterwards, we realized why that was happening. We still had our workflows throttled up. So we still, as soon as 128 documents appeared, we pulled them through and started running workflow against it. And if it had to wait, it had to wait. So post go live, we actually throttled it back down. We actually went the other extreme. We set it to 1. And then our problems went away. We actually now run the schedule of import agent right till about 7 o'clock. And when we stop at 7, there's only a handful of workflows that are left waiting to be processed. Repository database, performance degradation. We had some severe problems with when we went live with the database side of things. We resolved some of those by rebuilding indexes, resolved some of those by moving our disk storage to new set of disks. The main thing that I would like to say on this is what we found with Laserfiche database, especially when it's in full recovery mode, is the logs get very, very large, especially where we are constantly updating the tables because of changing our metadata. And so you have to be quite careful with space. If you think, well, my database is 100 gig, 150 is enough on the disk space, I would actually say you should have at least 2 or 2.5 times that available. Lastly, Rico, we found that IDX files and PDF files weren't appearing in equal sites. So an IDX file would start, workflow would get instigated, but the PDF is still waiting to be sent. So we changed our import agent profile to bring down all our PDFs first, and then bring down our IDX afterwards, because the IDX is that invoked workflow. Once again, at the beginning, we mentioned that we tried not to use any kind of coding, bespoke development. However, for MSS, we had to do it. Now, this is not the side I showed you. What I showed you is when a document is produced, when it gets to Laserfiche, what happens. What also happens at the very end is when a document is printed by these systems, if nothing happened on the Laserfiche side, the user could still see this document using the inherent document production within those systems. With the workflow at the very end, we send the entry ID or the TOC ID, which Laserfiche document has, back into those systems to say, that document that you generated a little while ago, here's its entry ID, update it, and we actually update it with a hyperlink because we use web access to see documents through those two systems. For the MSS side, we were a bit stuck that we couldn't code anything different because the only thing available to us was the IDM's Tower DLL. So we had to code Back to the Future in C and Power Builder to make it work. And at the moment it is running, and we are making MSS think Tower is still there, that IDM is still there. But in fact, it isn't there. It's just tower.dll or IDM links interface.dll, and it's pointing actually to Laserfiche. That was probably the most, what can I say, how can I describe it? Frustrating. It was a complete nightmare trying to get that one to work. But at the end of the day, with Sopra, we worked together and we actually resolved that problem, but it took a very long time. Right, just to wrap up, what did we achieve at the end of this? What did we give back to the users and the business? We now had the documents in one repository, not scattered over 5 different systems. You do search on one mortgage account number, you see every document. In the past, you would have to probably go and log into a few systems, look at some filer locations. So that was a benefit to them. We also were able to maintain the links between the documents and the servicing platforms. We also managed to give them a fully integrated system with their with our current platforms. We did it in a way that it is loosely coupled so that if we were to upgrade, and we are, next project is to upgrade those systems, we have to do very little on the Laserfiche side. We, as far as the users are concerned, instead of the IDM viewer, they see web access, but everything is the same. We have now given them a scalable and supportable infrastructure based on Microsoft, where we can actually now give more support in the infrastructure teams because all our systems are Microsoft server-based and SQL Server-based. Monday, 7th October, we went live. That was actually under 6 months by about 10 days. All I can say, it was a special day. And after that, on the Tuesday, we couldn't sleep because we had still problems to look after. But if you look back, I think we probably did well. I think we did well. However, this is the bit that salespeople like to see. What did it give back to us? So we got rid of Oracle and Unix. That gave us 40,000 back. We gave up our optical drives with the robotic arm jukebox, gave it a hug and said goodbye, so we didn't have to use that anymore. The retrieval to the operations side, the retrieval of documents which were greater than 2 years was 40 seconds. Now they could see them probably in about a couple of seconds, if they're unlucky, usually within a second or so. There were 5 major incidents in 2013 which created lots of outages, made us breach some of our SLAs. That was valued at 90,000. We got that back. The Laserfiche side was, again, I don't know these costings, these were provided by the project manager, was 67,500. So the net benefit, if you want to count your money, was around 100,000 for the first year. Okay, what are we looking to do in the future? We have a phase 2 and a phase 3. Phase 2, as I mentioned, we kept a like-for-like solution. What we want to do is now use the power of Laserfiche. We want to use the OCRs first for the quick field side. We want to also use Laserfiche forms wherever we possibly can. We are looking at phase 3, incidentally, is when HR and finance are to come aboard to do their processes, and we will be working with them soon. We have looked at the RECO connector, or will be looking at the RECO connector, so that we have RECO MFDs to see how a user can rather use their desktop to print documents, can go directly to the RECO MFDs, search for their mortgage, print all the documents from there, and go back to the PC and come back after 10 minutes it was all printed. We also will strive to keep updated, upgraded with Laserfiche, because one thing with Laserfiche is they are constantly moving forward. That was one of the reasons we took you, but that's one of the reasons we've got to ensure we keep up. Last but not least, this work was not done by me. It was done by a few people, and we had support from many sides, from the top end down to the bottom. The project sponsor, who was also my manager, so I had no excuse to mess this one up. We had project manager was Louise Donovan. I was the technical lead. We had business reps. Harvey obviously was our VAR. We had support from the IT management team, which ought to be acknowledged. And those that did the grafting. All these people were involved in the project, and I felt it was absolutely valid for me to mention them here. I think it was a team effort, and doing it in 6 months, fair enough, it's a good effort, but nevertheless, without this team, I don't think it could have been achieved. Any questions?
What was your user take-up like? Thank you. What was your user take-up like? Did you have trouble getting it out to the business?
Initially, there was friction, shall I say. Initially, I think with most systems, when you change, although most of our users had an idea what this is going to look like beforehand, so we had introduced it to them, we obviously had there to get training. When sort of the first few times things go wrong, they don't like it, but I think after a while they do get used to it and they see the benefits. We have improvements to make also. I wouldn't say we ourselves in the team that developed it, we're still not happy, we still want to improve it further, but by and large, yes, initially we got a new system. I like the old one because that's quite natural if you've been using it for 10 years, 11 years. But as time mends, as they say, and they are getting used to it now, and I think it's going down well.